Hi, Gabriela. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for having me today.
It is such a pleasure to have you. I was just in your neck of the woods. I was in Mexico.
I know in Chihuahua.
Yes, I was in Chihuahua, which, by the way, listeners, there is no museum for Chihuahuas. Although Chihuahua breed did originate in that city, I was honestly, Gabriela, thinking there was going to be a museum, and everyone there was like, "What? No, there's no museum." But I don't know. I think a lot of people would visit the city if there was a Chihuahua museum.
I'll relay the message to the government in
Okay,
Chihuahua
thank
to
you.
see if we
Thank
can create
you.
one.
FemTech in a Chihuahua museum is all I'm asking. But it was such a great time. It was hosted by FemTech Mexico, which we're going to get into today. And it was a really exciting time to see how women's health is getting done in Central and Southern America. So excited to jump into this today.
Great. Let's talk about it.
Let's kick off with telling our listeners more about your background and your training and how you got into women's health.
I'm a lawyer by education. So I studied law in Mexico, then I studied a master's in law. Then I worked as a lawyer in New York. And then I decided that was not my thing. So I went back to school to study public administration and I specialized in education and health. And after that, I came back to Mexico and I worked for several years in public health, but not specifically in women's health. So that was that. And then when I turned like 47 and I saw my 50th birthday coming up, I actually went into a deep like introspection on what I wanted to build in the next 10, 15 years. I love creating stuff. And my passion is also to have impact and make this a better world. And that's what I've been doing my whole life in several social entrepreneurships that I've done throughout my life. And suddenly everything clicked because my passions are education, health, women's rights. But also I had in 2018, 2009, 19, I had a very complex experience with menopause.
Mm.
I was surprised by it. I don't know how this happened, but I was surprised that it happened, as I was surprised when menstruation got to my life many years ago. And it took me a year and a half to know that I was going through perimenopause. I was 44 at that time. And I started navigating from one doctor to the other, depending on the different symptoms I got, insomnia, issues with my skin, pain in my joints, and so palpitations. But I did not have hot flashes, and I still had my menstruation each month. So I didn't know what was happening. I just thought I was going crazy. So suddenly, like everything came together. Like I wanted to do something new, and I knew that there was nothing for women at this stage, at least not in Mexico. And I started doing research, and suddenly everything clicked. And that's when I decided to create Sin Reglas, mainly to break the taboo, change the story that we were talking about in terms of menopause, but also improve women's health. And so that's how I got involved with women's health.
I love it. I love it. Coming from a lawyer in New York City to menopause queen in Mexico. I love it. I feel like when I first started doing this podcast 5 years ago, and we would talk about menopause, we really just mostly focused on hot flashes. And I would say that brain fog was also part of the conversation as well.
Brain.
But I really didn't hear about all these other symptoms. We have episodes from 2020 where we talk about there's 34 symptoms, but then we only focused on two, the brain fog and the hot flash. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel really excited that I'm excited is a weird term to use, but it's enlightening to me to hear these women share about all these other symptoms and that they were severe. Like the dry skin was severe enough that you were like, something is literally wrong with my body,
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong with my
Mm-hmm.
skin, or the heart palpitations, or this waves of panic. What was the other one? The joint pain. That's another really interesting
Joint
one.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would
And
never
even like
think it's
anxiety.
menopause.
Yeah. No, and the other one was like insomnia and anxiety. I think for me, those were the worst ones because they
Yeah.
actually affect, like deeply affect your life. Um, and I was surprised that it took me a year and a half to know that it was perimenopause. And so, yeah, I decided that as I was able to vote, for example, for the first woman president in my country, or as I was able to go to university, because other women before me advanced women's rights, like I felt I needed to do this for the women of the next generation
That's right.
in Mexico and Latin America.
Yeah, yeah. The two other symptoms I've recently heard, one woman approached me saying that she's had chronic UTIs. Turns out that's a menopause symptom. And the
Yeah,
other one is a woman who her breasts grew 3 sizes.
three sizes.
Yes. And I was like, what? Whoa, whoa, wait, what? Your breasts grew in menopause? Yeah. And she was like, yeah, I had to get all new business suits. And oh my gosh. So
Oh no,
hormones affect everything. And I think that's the moral of the
everything.
story is all your systems are affected by menopause in unexpected ways, potentially. Good thing that menopause is on the rise in terms of innovation and solutions. In fact, our research shows that 73% of menopause startups were founded in the last 5 years. That's a huge deal, y'all. Let that sink in. 73% of all tech-based solutions for menopause founded since 2020. That is so significant in terms of a spike of new solutions. And one of the 75% was Sin Reglas, your company. Can you tell us more about your
Yes.
company, what it does?
Plus has a mission to transform the experience of menopause for all women in Mexico and Latin America. And we do that through a holistic three-pronged approach. So first, we do it by empowering women through a web app that includes a Meno test, which is a self-assessment and education tool to know in which stage of menopause you're in. We have educational resources like the Menopause Guide, but also workshops and micro-learning strategy. So you get videos, very short videos on your WhatsApp. And then we have Meno coaching, which are peer support groups, and a virtual clinic that uses telemedicine. And there we have a gynecologist, a GP, a psychologist, thanatologist, sexologist, everything you need. But also we have a care protocol that has to do with holistic care, but also with gender perspective. The second thing we do is we want to transform the workplaces for women in menopause. So we work with companies to design these inclusive workplaces through a diagnostic, which is a survey we apply to employees. And then we do workshops to create awareness. What we want to do is change the narrative on menopause, but also have people connect from knowledge and empathy and not from ignorance and prejudice. And then we offer the Meno coaching, the peer support groups, and the healthcare to women at this stage. And finally, we support the company or the organization to design their inclusion policy for women in menopause. And the third prong has to do with promoting systemic change. We know that as Sin Reglas, we will not be able to care for all women in menopause or change the experience and transform it for all women. We know that we have to do a systemic change, make a systemic change. And the only way to do it is through public policy and research. So that's the three-pronged approach. And what we do there is promote research along other academic research institutions, but also work. For example, right now we're just doing a legal benchmark study on menopause at the federal level and at state level to be able to think in terms of the law and the rights of women at this stage, the right to health and the right to work, and what we have to do in terms of legal reform, but also in terms of public policy. So in general, what we want to do is transform the experience of menopause for all women through working with the individual women, workplaces, and the system.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. It reminds me so much of climate tech. And hear me out here. When climate tech and clean energy became a thing, all of the startups that were creating the first solar panels and trying to make it mainstream, they also always had to have a political angle to it, right? They were having to change policies in order for their companies to even exist or have a business model. And it was a
Mhm.
few years ago that someone was like, I don't know why more femtech companies don't have lobbying arms in terms of as part of their startup, because for them to succeed, society's regulations literally have to change for them to succeed in either being covered as a business model or being accepted in the workplace as something that's a critical solution to their employees. And so what I hear you saying is literally that model where, yes, we have a solution for women in menopause, but in order for that to even succeed, we need to meet her where she's at in her employment and her community via politics.
No, totally. And also because if you see menopause from not only from a medical perspective, but from a broader perspective that has to do with biology, psychology, social, and cultural factors, then you have to do a systemic change, because if not, it won't happen. If you want to
That's right.
transform the experience of menopause, you have to approach it from a very holistic perspective.
Yeah. Let's dive deeper into a few of the things you said. First, let's talk about the Meno test. What is the Meno test? What factors are you looking at? And why is it important for a woman to know where in the process of perimenopause she is?
So one of the things we found out when we did the first study on the experience of menopause in Mexico in 2022 is that most women didn't know in which stage of menopause they were in, and they didn't know if they even were in perimenopause. So we decided we needed a tool to help women find this out. And this is a self-assessment tool, but also an education tool, because once you start answering the questions in the questionnaire, you start like making connections on the
Oh,
symptoms and what you're actually feeling.
yeah.
So at the end, we tell you in which stage you are, and we give you tips and hacks for the symptoms that are causing the most impact in your life. But also, the important part is that you make the connections. And it's like a tool that helps you learn more about yourself, how you're living through menopause, how it affects you. And it's based on the green scale. So we ask 20 plus questions regarding different symptoms. And at the end, we tell you in which stage of menopause you're in.
Is it stages like stage 1 through 4, or is it like 0 to 100% menopausal? Or what is, when you say stages, tell me what that
Just
means.
perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause, or
Got it.
mainly the stages. And it's really simple, but it really helps you a lot. A
Yeah.
lot of women are in doubt, right? And
Yeah.
every time someone uses it and they tell us about it, they say, I didn't even know that these symptoms existed. I knew it
Yeah.
was like hot flashes and irregular periods or no period, but and maybe a couple of more. But when you look at the green scale, there are many other symptoms.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think the Meno test has been like pretty successful in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mentioned earlier that I had a friend who was telling me she's an older woman, she's friends with me, and she was texting me like, "Hey, I know you work in women's health. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you this, but I keep getting these chronic UTIs for a year and doctors just keep giving me antibiotics." And I know she's a little older, so I was like, "How old are you?" And she was like, "I'm 49." And I said, well, "That is a symptom of menopause." And she was like, "Menopause?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I think I might be the first person to literally put the M word in her head." Like she
Yeah.
literally had, she was like, "I figured that was like way later." And I was like, "What?" And I sent her a few menopause apps that were talking about
Mhm.
chronic UTIs as a symptom. But it was like such a critical moment for her to be like, whoa, I was so deep in a rabbit hole of antibiotic resistance and antibiotics. And I actually need to go down the hole of hormones and female health and aging, right? Like it's a totally different Google search, but it's purely because I said, I think that this is what the stage is. And that's what it sounds like your test does, is it opens the door for women gently and informatively saying, I actually think this is the phase you're in.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, mainly that's what women tell us when they use it, that they had helped a lot to identify all other symptoms and also see how much they were affecting them.
Yeah, totally. That's the other, yeah, women rarely put a barometer on how much this is actually impacting their day-to-day life. Because we're powerhouses. We just work through it. And it also probably creeps up. I haven't been through menopause yet, so I don't know. But from what it sounds like, if this is years of your life, like it could one day all of a sudden just be your norm, right?
Yes. The other thing that helps is once you answer the Meno test and you get the results, it helps you when you go to the doctor. When the woman in menopause goes to the doctor, the same taboo that is present in society is present in the medical context, and it's present also in the workplace. But in the medical context, what we found out, for example, from the study we did, is that 1 in 2 women don't feel comfortable talking to the doctor about it. Only 1 in 2 women have the most basic conversation about menopause with the doctor, and only 1 in 5 women in Mexico actually get healthcare for menopause. So when what we're trying to give is women is a tool with a list of questions, but also with the result of the Meno test to go to the doctor and have more information when they have this
So interesting.
appointment.
When you first started to answer this question, you told us about a study that you had done on the perception
Mm-hmm.
and impact of menopause in specifically Mexican society. I'd love for you to tell us more about what that study was and what were some of the findings you had.
Yes. One of the things before we started to launch Sin Reglas, we thought that we had to see if women actually went through the same things that in my case I went through.
Yeah.
And there was no data,
Mm.
no data in the Ministry of Health, no data in the National Institute of Public Health, no data in the Statistics Institute in Mexico, no data.
Wow. No one had ever asked
So
women. No one had ever asked women.
no,
Wow.
not even in the National Survey on Health,
Wow.
not even there. So we did this study, and it was like very enlightening in many senses. It's long, and you can actually download it completely from our website. But what we found is there's a great lack of knowledge. So 8 out of 10 Mexicans know little to nothing about menopause. 9 out of 10 women have symptoms. 1 out of 2 women report that menopause has had an impact in their work. And 1 out of 2 women is diagnosed with another condition at this stage. We also found out that the average age for menopause in Mexico is 47.8 years. So it's lower and earlier than women in the US or in the UK, for example. What else did we found out many things. I already talked about menopause as a taboo. So we found out that, for example, 8 out of 10 women are not comfortable talking to their supervisors in the workplace about menopause. And also the lack of access to health for women at this stage. We also found, for example, that the stigma is greater with younger women and men than when women in menopause or postmenopause. Also, younger women have more negative feelings about menopause than older women. So women that are already in postmenopause tend to have a more positive view and more positive feelings attached to menopause than younger women. But also we found out that there is a low adoption of, for example, hormonal replacement therapy. In another study we did, not in that 2022, but in another that one we did in 2024, we found out that around 11 to 12% of women actually receive some kind of alternative treatment like hormonal replacement therapy, for example. If you ask them about what are they doing, then or what are they willing to do, then what we find is something very interesting. So half of the women say they're willing to try both, like allopathy and homeopathy. And 1 in 3 women say that they would only try homeopathy, and just 1 in 10 say that they would just try hormonal replacement therapy. So we have a very low adoption of these treatments. We have a lot of things that we can discuss, but I think that those are some of the main findings of the study.
Yes. Wow. Those are, as a scientist, I love a good survey and I love some good data because we can't change it if we can't measure it. We need to measure it so we can
Exactly.
change it. And we need to know what we should actually be changing, like what actually needs fixing.
And what we don't have, and what we actually need urgently, is to know more things about the economic impact of menopause in the health system, but also as a loss of productivity in the economy. Um, in another study we did, which is amazing, and this actually was based on data from the National Statistics Institute in Mexico. But what we found is like pretty alarming, because what we saw is that women from 45 to 54-year-olds in that age bracket, the main reason why they are not employed is voluntary resignation,
Wow.
more so than women in the 30s, and double the rate of men at that same age. So women are mainly, or there's a voluntary resignation at this stage, or presenteeism, which we have not measured yet, but we do have to measure it. The other thing we don't know a lot of things, right? But the other important thing is we don't know how much women spend in menopause, right? In terms of visits to the doctor, fractures due to osteoporosis that was not treated or identified in time, how many visits to the health system. And we're just promoting some research at Colegio de Mexico just to find out these things. And what we need is to actually do an estimate of the cost of menopause to the health system and to the economy. Then those we know that there are some studies in the UK, in the US, in Canada, Ireland, but not in Mexico. And I think we need to do a lot of research in that sense, because if not, we won't be able to do the business case in terms of why the health system has to invest in women's health at this stage, and why the risk factors for other chronic degenerative diseases are just so high at this stage. And if we don't do anything, we cannot prevent them. And that's going to cost a lot of money to the health system.
Yep. I think that it is one of the most profound thing that's come out of FemTech, and there's a lot of profoundness that has come out of FemTech, but this idea of women not being in leadership positions when they are at their most trained, their most professional, their most
Exactly.
experienced. And this whole time, I mean, as a female founder and a female leader and a feminist, I read articles, I go to conferences, I get listen to panels and podcasts talking about how either men are not selecting us to be in leadership, or there's like a competitiveness between women because there's only one seat for one woman, or there's a lot of these like gender and societal things that are blaming why there's not enough women in the C-suite. And I think it was probably 2 or 3 years ago I started to hear the menopause companies, and actually now that I'm saying it out loud, it corresponds with the rise of menopause startups. Y'all started to say, I actually think that one of the like a very significant, not the only, but a significant factor for why women are not in the C-suite, in the boardroom, at the top of the food chain for employment is because they're dropping out because their symptoms of menopause are so bad that they are self-selecting to drop out. And I'm like, oh, this is talk about a leak in the pipe. Like this is a
Exactly.
huge reason women aren't in leadership, and we haven't thought about it or talked about it.
And we need more research also, because we have a hypothesis that women are at the peak of their career, not 45 to 54 years old, but they are experiencing microaggressions and discrimination in the workplace. And that we know from other studies. And then they're experimenting menopause symptoms that can be incapacitating. But not only that, the caregiving, the number of caregiving hours that they have to dedicate at this stage are increasing, because we also now do not, even if we decided to be mothers, we not only have kids, probably adolescents, or if we have them earlier, maybe grandchildren, but also parents that are getting older. And so the caregiving increases at this stage. So it's like the perfect recipe for burnout
Yep.
for this stage.
Yep. You're
And
already
so
not
women
feeling
that can,
well. You're already not feeling well. And
yeah,
then all these other factors are coming and saying, I need you to give more. I need you to give more. I need you to give more. And she needs to give up something. Wow.
exactly.
Wow.
And then the other part, not all women can actually resign, right? So, for example, in Mexico, 30% of women are actually the heads of the family, and they cannot resign.
Nope.
So what happens? They just carry the burden in their health, no? And I can give you a story of a woman I was talking to last night, that she's going through menopause. She just changed jobs, so she has a very, very demanding job. A 5-year-old girl, a mom that was just diagnosed probably with cancer, so she has been taking her to many tests and whatever. She was crying yesterday and saying, I cannot do this. I cannot like work 15 hours a day, plus take care of my mom, plus take care of my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter. I cannot. I think I'm going to have to resign and look for another job. And that's like a very common story. No?
Yep.
So one is of voluntary resignation, and the other one is of women that are losing their jobs because of menopause. And I'm going to tell you another story. So this story is of Maria. I met her 2 years ago. And so she comes to a talk that I give. And after the talk, she comes to me and she tells me, I can't believe what you were saying. Like every single thing that you said, I'm experiencing. And I thought I was going crazy. And now I know that it's just like the symptoms of menopause. And she tells me that she just lost her job. She's 49. She just lost her job. She worked at a global tech company, and she was actually asked to leave. And when she starts telling me the story, she tells me, I ask her, what happened? Why did you lose your job? And she tells me, first, like my boss started telling me that I was very irritable and that I had to take care of that and go to psychologist, but this was not how it's supposed to be in the workplace. And then one day I started getting these horrible migraines, and I had something that I had to hand in, and I couldn't open the computer because these migraines were like getting so bad. And so my boss was like super mad at me. And then I started having this anxiety, like very horrible anxiety and insomnia. So I wouldn't sleep for weeks. And so she starts telling me all this story. And then by the end, it was like, you lost your job because of menopause. She had been working in the company for 15 years. And each time she had she was in a leadership role in the company, and she was let go.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
For the symptoms, right?
Yeah. And those are not stories that we're reading about that are titled Menopause Caused Me to Lose My Job. It's woman overstressed, overworked, doesn't know. And then at the end of the day, society just says she didn't show up well, right? But that's not the headline. We don't realize that it's menopause, that this is that root cause of it. I have a chapter on menopause in my book, Unlocking Women's Health. I know you have a copy.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask
Yes.
you about a few of the companies that I featured in the chapter in comparison to menopause. There's the book. Yep.
There's a book.
In comparison to menopause in Mexico. So first, are there factors that you measure and that you treat that are maybe specific to Hispanic women? Because we have telehealth companies in the US like Midday or Midi Health or Electra Health, but they are really focused on US women. So is there a difference between what you're measuring and treating for Mexican women?
What we think is that menopause is a very unique experience for every woman. Even within Mexico, Mexico is a pluricultural nation, no? So it's not the same being a woman in an urban setting in Mexico City, in a corporate in Santa Fe, than an indigenous woman in the south of Mexico in a little village, or a woman working in a maquila in the north of Mexico, like in a factory. So every single experience is different. But what we know is that the culture and the societal norms and the lifestyle and many other factors determine the unique experience for each woman. So in offering healthcare for women, we have to take into account all these factors.
Mm-hmm.
For example, women in indigenous communities, some of them don't even have a name for menopause in their language, in their indigenous language. In some communities, this is like a normal stage of life. They don't even have a name for it. they call it like, okay, she dried up or she doesn't have the blood anymore, but there's no specific word. And women in some of these communities, for example, live through menopause or through aging as wise women, as healers, as the guardians of their culture, and
Well, I
as
like
many other
those names.
things.
Those names are okay. The dried up,
Yeah,
lost your blood ones,
no,
not
the
so
dried
much,
up,
but I
no.
like those ones.
And but in other communities, for example, the value of a woman is placed on the ability to reproduce.
Mhm.
So once the woman cannot reproduce, then she becomes invisible in the community. And this is really hard. So, for example, in terms of sexuality, no, just to put an example, um, so there's a lack of knowledge about how menopause affects sexuality in terms of low libido, vaginal dryness, and such. And women do not know it's happening because of menopause. They do not have access to health. And even if they do, the doctor never talks about this because it's a taboo also within the medical context. And women are having sex with pain because they cannot even tell their partners that it hurts, that they don't want to do it, and because they have the fear of being left behind by their partners. And it has to do a lot with all these social norms and machismo that exists in Mexico. So you cannot actually talk about one sole experience of menopause, but about unique experiences for each woman. And that makes it more difficult. And also, we're still learning about how to better care for women at this stage. We know there's this problem and many problems around it, but I think we're still learning and
Yeah.
we're still listening to how women are living through it and what they need so that we better care for them.
Yeah, we are definitely in a position where menopause is becoming more mainstream, but we are literally at step one, where it's what is the experience of it? We are not
Exactly.
anywhere near step 10, which is, oh, like this is what's common, and here's your solution, and here's that. And by the way, your husband already knows about menopause, and right, like our society, doctors know, and you have options. In fact, if you don't want this solution, there's three others you could try. Like we are not near that at all yet. We are
No,
still at the listening tour where we're finding and understanding women's
exactly.
experiences. That's right. Yeah. I want to talk to you about, we've been talking a lot about women's health in the workplace in terms of menopause, but what suggestions do you have to date for workplaces to become more menopause friendly?
First of all, we have to break the taboo, break the silence, because when you have a theme that is surrounded by silence, this prevents women from having access to knowledge and to care. So we have to break the silence
What does that mean though? Should a manager say, are you menopausal? What is the appropriate breaking of
yeah.
silence in an employment setting?
So first, what we suggest is to do a survey to actually know the level of knowledge, the perceptions, the attitudes, and the behaviors related to menopause in the workplace, in that specific workplace. Because we have averages more or less in the companies that we've done the surveys, but specific companies have specific cultures, more open cultures, some have more conservative cultures, in which it's even more difficult to talk about it. So first we do the survey, and once we do the survey and we know all these things, we design workshops for the workplace. So the idea is to have like awareness workshops for everyone in the company or the organization, not only women, men, women, older men, younger men, everyone. And then we have coaching sessions for the leaders of the organization. Also, that's, I think, super important. Then we have to see, for example, how we create these peer support groups for women in menopause so that they can actually talk about their experience, share their experience, and so that they can realize that they're not alone. Also, access to healthcare. No, access to healthcare. That is super important because when a woman is supported through this stage, she can keep working and she can be productive and she can be a leader. But we need support at this stage. As we have developed, for example, policies for maternity, and paternity, we have to develop policies for women in menopause, for women at this stage. I always try to think about the reproductive cycle of women, no? So we have the first M, which is menstruation, the second M, which not all women go through, but it's the M of maternity, and then the third M, which is menopause. And we have to design workplaces for women during all these stages, not only one.
That's right.
Plus, all women go through menopause, right? So then it's access to healthcare, and also the design of inclusion policies for women in menopause. So it's not something that you just give one workshop, but you keep working on it to create the awareness, to create the coaching of the leaders, and to start breaking the silence. We have to break the taboo because 8 out of 10 women don't feel comfortable talking about it in the workplace. And traditionally, menopause was seen as something that the woman had to take care by herself. I don't know where, not even in the medical context, but less so in the workplace. And what we have to make conscious is about the importance of talking about this in the workplace.
So what I
Oh,
hear
and the
is
other thing, sorry,
go ahead,
flex
go
time.
ahead.
I forgot to flex time and like being able to work at different times or work in different places or adjusting the roles also. So imagine a woman having the night shift when she is actually going through insomnia, no? And it's something that it can be easily sometimes adjusted. Maybe she can have now the day shift, not the night shift, or things like that. Other roles is more difficult to adjust. The other thing that we can adjust is the physical conditions of the workplace, no? Starting with the temperature of the place, the access to restroom, access to cold water, adjusting, for example, the uniforms, if you have uniforms, because mostly some were designed by men for men, and women in menopause need something that they can layer, that is fresh, like natural fibers. So there's lots of things that you can adjust. The other thing is the access to healthcare and what the insurance covers and what it doesn't. No, so if insurance can actually cover hormonal replacement therapy, for example, that will also help.
Yeah. Wow. Hire this woman, y'all. If you are an employer interested in how do you address menopause in your workplace, obviously this woman is overflowing with information and actionable steps. That's what I really love that you just presented me with is actionable steps, right? Because, and I heard step one is bring in an external speaker to even just open the conversation and doing a survey, figuring out where your company is at, and then figuring out exactly what you need. Because if that survey comes back with our uniforms are unbearable, that's the thing you need to address. But if that's nowhere on the survey, then you don't need to worry about the uniform part. So you'll learn through these surveys. That's so interesting. I actually gave a talk at a very large, it was an energy company. So it had nothing to do with healthcare, it was energy, but they had me come in and give a talk called Ovulation in the Office, how to support your menstruating coworkers. And I took
That's
data.
great.
Yeah. And it was a publicly traded company. And I could see therefore how many employees they had, and I could see how many female employees they had. And so I did some statistics like if 10% of women have endometriosis, you likely have 2,500 employees with endometriosis. And so therefore your job is losing, it was something crazy like 15,000 days off a year, endometriosis symptoms, if each one is taking an extra 3 days. And the male managers, they showed up to the webinar very, oh my God, I can't believe I have to be here. This is so weird. And they left being like, this is super applicable to my team, my department, my bottom line. I had no idea. This is really important, actually. And in the chat, they had an anonymous chat, and a woman posted, I have endometriosis and our company did not cover my surgery and I had to pay out of pocket and it was a lot of money. And the managers were like replying, being like, what? We didn't know this. This is really critical. And I thought to myself, oh my God, we may have actually just changed a policy at their job because I taught them about ovulation and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think external speakers, it's like such low hanging fruit to just have somebody come in and do a webinar for even just the managers in order for them to get on board. Gabriela, I
And
have.
the other thing,
Oh, go ahead,
Brittany,
please. Yeah.
sorry, is the lack of data within the companies too, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk to the companies, for example, do you know how many women have left because of menopause? Of course, or women don't know, so they don't report it, or they're embarrassed to say it, or they don't even have it as an option for
Yeah.
women at this age when they do the exit surveys.
That's why we've never talked about
So
it, because it wasn't an answer on the survey, right? It wasn't.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So we need to start collecting data also in the workplace.
That's right. Gabriela, I want to ask you one more question. So you are co-founder of FemTech MX, FemTech Mexico. Tell us
Yeah.
more about why are you forming it? What is it going to do? Tell us more about it. How can people get involved?
Thank you for the question. So one of the things that we noticed, the few entrepreneurs that are doing things in femtech, is that there's not an ecosystem existing in Mexico and Latin America in femtech. So what does this mean? That entrepreneurs are trying to navigate alone, knocking the doors of VCs or academic institutions or companies all alone. There's no space where we can bring together all the players in femtech space. And we have a huge gap in women's health. And the traditional pathways in healthcare are not solving it. More creativity, we need innovation, we need collaboration to be able to accelerate the closing of these gaps. And we think that the best way to do it is to create this ecosystem where we bring together all the voices, all the players, so we can start having this conversation so that we can promote innovation in femtech, but also we can create working relationships easier. We can learn from each other and create lasting relationships so we can actually start changing women's health and closing all the gaps that we have in terms of knowledge, in terms of access, in terms of quality, and innovating also in creating new pathways for healthcare. Initially, that's what we're trying to do, create the ecosystem. We still have, you were there in Chihuahua for the first event. We're having another one in October in Mexico City. And the idea is to bring all these players and start a conversation of what we need to promote innovation in this area. So it's still under construction, but we feel we needed to create this ecosystem.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. When I started FemTech Focus, it was because there literally was no community anywhere in the world. And now we have all these countries setting up FemTech Canada, FemTech Japan, FemTech Israel, FemTech Mexico. And I think it's so critical because women everywhere in the world will require different solutions. And so that's why we need a Mexico-specific menopause telehealth company, even if there are menopause telehealth companies in other countries, because they need the language barrier, the cultural barrier, the policies, the local government, et cetera, but also the founders themselves. So the founders working in Mexico will need different resources than a founder living in Los Angeles or Toronto. So I totally agree. You need these local communities that then pair up with the international community, and we all benefit.
Exactly. And I think you touched one very important point. So FemTech Focus, right? You started it. But do you know how many people have you inspired in creating solutions? And I'm one of them. So when I started having these ideas, I crossed your path with your podcast, and the podcast inspired me. And for example, right now, not really, you inspired me, and I have been following you since. So it's like an incredible privilege to be here having this conversation with you. And I'm so thankful. 3 years ago, I would have not thought about this. So this is great. But for example, from Chihuahua, from the event you were in Chihuahua, so I was talking to Mayra, the founder of FemTech MX, and she was telling me, you know what? We've just got the first startup that is starting because of the event. Those students went, students heard, students were inspired, and now we have the first story like that is actually that started there, right? So we have to also inspire others to enter femtech, because it's not only, so if you invest in women's health, you're also investing in their families, in their society, in the economy, and a more sustainable and fair world for everyone. So I think that we need more innovation in this area and
Oh
more
my God, I
investment in this
love
area.
it. I love it. What I hear you saying is that, yes, these local organizations like FemTech Mexico support the existing founders, but they also inspire others to join the movement.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. Gabriela, what an amazing interview. I'm honored to have you, but it sounds like this is a full circle moment for you. This has been
Yes.
really great, and I'm so excited to come to Mexico City in October. Can't wait to be there.
Yes. I'm waiting for you in October.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.